"You don't belong here, widow." The words cut through the Christmas market like a blade. Clara Whitmore stood frozen as laughter erupted around her shattered candles, mud soaking through her worn dress. This wasn't just another humiliation. This was the moment that would change everything, because the man watching from across that crowded square, he was about to make a choice that would shake Red Hollow to its foundations. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. And if her story moves you, hit that like button. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. The winter of 1892 arrived in Red Hollow like a fist through glass, sudden, violent, and unforgiving. Clara Whitmore learned this the hard way. Bent over her work table at 3 in the morning while ice crept across her cabin windows in jagged patterns that looked like broken promises. Her hands ached. They always ached now, fingers stiff from hours of dipping wicks into melted wax, pulling them out, waiting for the coating to harden, then dipping again. The rhythm had become her heartbeat. Dip, lift, wait. Dip, lift, wait. Each candle took 40 dips to reach the proper thickness. She'd made 17 tonight, needed 30 by morning. The cabin was so cold she could see her breath, but she couldn't afford more firewood. Not after paying what passed for rent on this tilting shack at the edge of town. The landlord had smiled when he'd doubled her rate last month, his tobacco-stained teeth catching the lamplight. Widow's tax, he'd called it, like he was doing her a favor by not throwing her out entirely. Thomas had been dead 8 months. 8 months since the mine collapse that took him, and 7 other men. 8 months since the company paid her exactly nothing because Thomas had signed something he couldn't read that said his life was worth whatever the mine decided it was worth. 8 months since she'd become invisible. No, that wasn't quite right. She hadn't become invisible. She'd become something worse. She'd become visible in all the wrong ways. The women of Red Hollow looked at her like she was contagious, like widowhood might spread through proximity. The men looked at her like she was either pathetic or available, and she couldn't decide which was more insulting. The children just repeated what they heard at home, which meant they repeated everything cruel their parents said in whispers. Clara lifted another candle from the wax pot, watching the excess drip back down. The motion was hypnotic. It was also the only thing keeping her from thinking about how hungry she was, or how the roof leaked in 2 places now, or how she'd stood at Thomas's grave last week and felt nothing but exhausted. She'd loved him once, hadn't she? It seemed important to remember that, but the memory felt thin, like fabric washed too many times. They'd married young because that's what people did. He'd worked the mines because that's what men did. She'd kept house because that's what women did. And then he'd died because that's what miners did, eventually. And she was left with a stack of debts and a town that couldn't decide if she was a charity case or a cautionary tale. The candles, at least, were hers. She'd learned the craft from her grandmother, back when learning anything felt like possibility instead of survival. Her grandmother had made candles that burned clean and bright, candles that didn't smoke or sputter, candles that people requested by name. Clara had those same hands, that same patience. What she didn't have was her grandmother's reputation, or her confidence, or her ability to look people in the eye without flinching. But she had the skill, and in a frontier town where darkness came early and stayed late, people needed light. The Christmas market was her chance. It happened once a year in the town square, 3 days before Christmas. Merchants came from as far as Denver. Families saved money all year to buy something special. And everyone needed candles. For wreaths, for windows, for the midnight service at the church. The wealthy bought them by the dozen. Even the poor bought a few. Clara had spent 6 weeks preparing. She'd made candles in every size, some plain, some twisted, some embedded with dried lavender she'd gathered last summer. She'd poured everything she had into those candles, every cent, every hour, every desperate hope that maybe this time, maybe this year, people would see her work instead of her situation. She finished the last candle as dawn started breaking, gray light seeping through the gaps in her walls. 30 candles. Not enough to make her rich, but enough to pay rent and buy food and maybe have a little left over for fabric to patch her dress. The one she was wearing had been mended so many times, it looked like a map of small disasters. Clara allowed herself 5 minutes of rest, head down on the table, breathing in the sweet smell of beeswax. Then she started packing. The market opened at 8. She had to haul everything 3 miles into town, set up her table, and somehow find the courage to stand there while people either ignored her or pitied her. The thought made her stomach clench, but there wasn't another choice. There was never another choice. She loaded the candles carefully into a borrowed cart, layering them with straw so they wouldn't knock together. Each one represented hours of work. Each one had to be perfect. The walk into town took 90 minutes, pulling the cart through snow that had frozen overnight into ruts hard enough to crack wheels. By the time Clara reached the square, her shoulders were screaming and her breath came in ragged gasps that burned her lungs. The square was already crowded. Merchants had claimed the best spots. The ones near the church, the ones under the awning of the general store, the ones where foot traffic naturally funneled. Clara was left with a corner position near the back, partially blocked by a fence and far from any shelter. She could already feel the wind cutting through that space. She set up her table anyway, spread out a cloth her grandmother had embroidered, arranged the candles in careful rows, tallest in back, smallest in front, added a small sign with her prices, lower than most because she needed sales more than she needed profit. Then she waited. People passed. Most didn't look. A few glanced and kept walking. One woman stopped, picked up a candle, examined it like she was looking for flaws, then set it down without a word and moved on. Clara felt each rejection like a small cut, the kind that doesn't bleed much but stings for hours. By noon, she'd sold 3 candles. 3. And one of those had been to a woman who'd clearly bought it out of pity, her expression carefully arranged into something meant to be kind but landing somewhere closer to condescending. "It's difficult, isn't it?" the woman had said, pressing coins into Clara's hand. "Being alone. But you're managing so bravely." Clara had smiled and thanked her because what else could she do? Scream that she didn't want bravery, she wanted her life back? Explain that managing and living were 2 completely different things? The afternoon wore on. The cold deepened. Clara's feet went numb in her boots, and her face ached from holding a pleasant expression that nobody was looking at anyway. Then the boys came. There were 4 of them, ranging from maybe 10 to 14 years old. Clara recognized them. The youngest was the blacksmith's son. The others belonged to families who attended the same church she did, back when she'd still attended church. They were loud, shoving each other, laughing in that particular way boys laugh, when they're trying to impress each other with how little they care about consequences. They weren't paying attention. Or maybe they were paying exactly the right amount of attention to cause maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. The oldest one crashed into her table. It happened fast. One moment Clara's candles were standing in careful rows. The next moment the table was tilting, and then everything was falling, candles tumbling, rolling, hitting the frozen ground and shattering into chunks of wax that scattered like broken bones. Clara lunged forward, trying to catch something, anything, but her hands closed on empty air. She watched weeks of work explode across the square in the space of 3 heartbeats. The boys froze. Then they started laughing. Not apologizing, laughing. The kind of laughter that's nervous at first but gains confidence when nobody stops it. The kind of laughter that says, "This is funny, this is entertainment, this matters exactly as much as we decide it matters." "Should have been more careful, ma'am," the oldest boy said, his grin sharp and mean. "Can't just leave things where people might bump into them." Clara dropped to her knees in the mud and half-melted snow. Her dress soaked through immediately, ice water seeping into fabric that was already too thin. She started gathering pieces of broken candles with shaking hands, trying to salvage something, trying not to cry in front of the crowd that had started to gather. Because of course there was a crowd now. There hadn't been one when she was selling. But disaster? Humiliation? That drew people like blood drew flies. "Poor thing," someone murmured. "Should have secured her table better," someone else said. "Those boys ought to be punished," a third voice added, but nobody moved to actually punish them. Clara kept her head down, picking up wax fragments that were already dirty and ruined. Her throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "Don't cry, don't cry. Don't give them that too." "Maybe she shouldn't be taking up space at the market if she can't handle it," a woman's voice said, loud enough to carry. Clara didn't have to look up to know who it was. Vivian Ashcroft, daughter of the town's wealthiest family, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Clara's entire cabin. A few people laughed. Not many, but enough. Clara's vision blurred. She was going to cry. She was absolutely going to cry in front of all these people, and tomorrow they'd talk about it, and next week they'd still be talking about it, and she'd become the woman who broke down at the Christmas market. And that's enough. The voice cut through the square like an axe through wood. Everything stopped. The murmuring, the laughter, even the wind seemed to pause. Clara looked up. A man was pushing through the crowd, and people were moving out of his way like water around a stone. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that suggested he'd spent his life doing actual work instead of talking about it. His coat was good quality but worn, his hat pulled low, his face weathered in the way faces get when they're exposed to sun and wind and the kind of life that doesn't forgive mistakes. Caleb Mercer. Clara knew him by reputation only. Everyone in Red Hollow knew him by reputation. He owned the largest ranch in the territory, ran it himself with only a handful of hands, and came into town maybe twice a year. People said he was mean. People said he was ruthless. People said he'd killed a man once in a fight over water rights, though nobody could agree on the details. What people agreed on was that you didn't cross him. He stopped in front of the boys. "You knock over this woman's table?" His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more frightening. The oldest boy's grin evaporated. "It was an accident, sir. We didn't mean—" "I asked a question. Did you knock over her table?" "Yes, but—" "And did you apologize?" Silence. "I'll take that as a no." Caleb looked at each boy in turn, his gaze level and utterly without sympathy. "You've got 3 seconds to apologize to Mrs. Whitmore and offer to help clean this up. After that, I'm having a conversation with your fathers about paying for damages." The boys nearly trampled each other in their rush to apologize. Clara barely heard the words, too shocked to process what was happening. Caleb Mercer was defending her. Caleb Mercer, who didn't involve himself in town business, who barely acknowledged most people's existence, was standing in the square telling children to apologize to her. The boys fled as soon as Caleb nodded his dismissal. Then he turned to the crowd. "Anyone else have thoughts on how Mrs. Whitmore runs her business? Because I'm listening." He said it the way someone might say they're holding a loaded gun. Not a threat exactly, but a clear statement of potential. The crowd developed a sudden fascination with other areas of the market. Within 30 seconds, only a handful of people remained, most of them pretending they'd just stopped to look at something else entirely. Caleb knelt down next to Clara in the mud. Up close, he looked older than she'd expected. There were lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark hair. His hands, when he started gathering broken candles, were scarred and calloused, but moved with surprising gentleness. "Most of these are done for," he said, his voice different now, quieter, less sharp. "But some might be salvageable if you melt them down again." Clara found her voice, though it came out rough. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" "Defend me. I'm nobody. Those boys, their families have lived here for generations. You're just what?" He looked at her directly, and his eyes were an unexpected shade of gray-green, like storm clouds over grassland. "Just a person trying to make a living? Just someone who didn't deserve to have her work destroyed?" "I'm nobody," Clara repeated, because it was true, because everyone in Red Hollow knew it. Caleb was quiet for a moment, still gathering broken wax. Then he said, "I knew your husband, Thomas." Clara's hands stilled. "You did?" "He worked on my ranch one summer before he went into the mines. Good man, hard worker, laughed a lot." Caleb paused. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry." The kindness in his voice was somehow worse than the cruelty from earlier. Clara felt her careful control starting to crack. "Thank you." They worked in silence for a few minutes, collecting pieces. Clara's cart had survived, at least. So had about a third of the candles, the ones that had been in the back, protected by the others. When they finished, Caleb stood and brushed mud off his knees. Clara started to stand too, but her legs had gone stiff from kneeling in the cold. She stumbled slightly. Caleb caught her elbow, steadying her. His grip was firm but careful, like he was very aware of his own strength. "Thank you," Clara said again, hating how small her voice sounded. I need to get these home. Figure out what I can save." Caleb looked at the remaining candles on her cart. "How much for all of them?" Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The ones that aren't broken." "How much?" "You want to buy them?" She couldn't keep the surprise out of her voice. "That's generally what how much means." Clara did rapid calculations in her head. She had maybe 15 good candles left, plus another 10 that were slightly damaged but still functional. At her listed prices, that would be... She named a figure. Caleb pulled out a wallet and counted out bills. Then he counted out more bills. Clara stared. That's too much. That's almost double. Consider the extra payment for damages. Those boys should have paid you themselves, but I'm guessing they won't. He held out the money. Clara didn't take it. Couldn't take it. Because this was pity, obviously, and she'd had enough pity to last several lifetimes. I can't accept charity. It's not charity. I need candles. You need 25 candles? I've got a ranch house with 16 rooms. Most of them don't have proper lamps. Winter nights get dark. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Clara looked at him closely, trying to figure out if he was lying, but his expression was neutral, giving nothing away. This is too much money, she said finally. Then use it to make more candles, because I'll be needing another delivery in 2 weeks. Now she was certain he was lying. Nobody needed that many candles. But the money in his outstretched hand represented 2 months of rent, 3 months of food, enough to buy the supplies she'd need to keep working through the winter. Her pride said refuse. Her empty stomach said take it. Clara took the money. I'll have more ready in 2 weeks, she said quietly. What kind do you need? Whatever kind you make, you choose. Caleb started loading the candles into his own wagon, which was parked nearby. Clara noticed it was loaded with supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, nails, ranch business. She helped him load, even though he clearly didn't need help. It felt important to do something, to not be completely passive in this exchange. When the last candle was secured, Caleb turned back to her. You live out past Miller's Creek? Yes, the cabin with the blue door, which was optimistic since the paint had mostly peeled off, but it was still more blue than anything else. That's a long walk in this weather. I manage. I'm sure you do. He said it like he meant it, not like the woman earlier who'd praised her bravery while secretly pitying her. But my wagon's going that direction anyway. You want to ride? Clara's first instinct was to refuse, because accepting rides from strange men, even well-intentioned ones, was how women ended up in worse situations than they'd started in. But Caleb Mercer wasn't strange exactly. He was known, and she was so tired, and the thought of walking another 3 miles in the cold made her want to sit down and never get up. All right, she said. Thank you. The wagon ride was quiet. Caleb drove with the easy competence of someone who'd been doing it his whole life, guiding the horses around the worst of the ruts without seeming to think about it. Clara sat rigid on the bench beside him, very aware of the space between them, very aware that people would see her riding with him and would talk about it. Let them talk. They were going to talk anyway. You make good candles, Caleb said after a while. My mother used to make them. Haven't seen work that clean in years. My grandmother taught me. She teach you in Red Hollow? No, back east, Virginia. Clara surprised herself by continuing. She had a shop. People came from 3 towns over for her candles. She used to say that making light was holy work. Your grandmother sounds like she was smart. She was. Clara paused. She also told me I was stupid for marrying a miner and moving west. Caleb glanced at her, something that might have been humor in his eyes. Was she right? Clara thought about Thomas, about the promises he'd made of adventure and opportunity, about how those promises had slowly crumbled into routine and then tragedy. Probably. They lapsed back into silence. The road curved through pine forests, heavy with snow. A hawk circled overhead, dark against the gray sky. The only sounds were the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon and the wind moving through the trees. You should charge more, Caleb said suddenly. For the candles? You're underselling yourself. I saw your prices. They're half what they should be. Clara felt her defenses rise. I price them so people will buy them. You price them like you don't think they're worth anything. There's a difference. She wanted to argue, but he was right. She knew he was right. She'd set her prices low because she was afraid nobody would buy them otherwise, afraid that if she charged what they were actually worth, people would laugh at her presumption. It's hard to charge more when people see you as... Clara stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. As what? As someone who should be grateful for whatever she can get. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. People in Red Hollow can be cruel, especially to anyone they think is vulnerable. You're not from Red Hollow? Originally? No. Moved here 15 years ago after... He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. After some things changed. Clara recognized that tone. It was the same one she used when people asked about Thomas. The tone that said, "There's a story here, but I'm not telling it." They reached her cabin just as the sun was setting, turning the snow orange and gold. In that light, the place looked almost romantic. A small structure with smoke rising from the chimney, surrounded by pine trees, mountains looming behind. The illusion broke as soon as Caleb helped her down from the wagon, and she saw the place through his eyes. Sagging roof, cracked windows patched with paper, gaps in the walls stuffed with rags. "This is it," Clara said, trying to sound like she wasn't embarrassed. Caleb looked at the cabin for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "I'll be back in 2 weeks for those candles," he said finally. "Earlier if you finish them before then." "You really don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He climbed back onto the wagon, then paused. "Mrs. Whitmore? Those people at the market today? They're wrong about you." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and watched him drive away, his wagon disappearing into the gathering darkness. Inside, she lit one of her remaining candles and counted the money again. It was real. All of it was real. For the first time in 8 months, Clara Whitmore allowed herself to feel something that wasn't despair. It wasn't quite hope. Hope seemed too big, too dangerous. But it was something adjacent to hope. Something that whispered maybe tomorrow wouldn't be exactly like today. She poured wax into a new mold and started working. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside there was light. Caleb showed up 6 days later, not 2 weeks. Clara was in the middle of trimming wicks when she heard the wagon. Her first thought was the landlord, come early to squeeze more money out of her. Her second thought was that she'd miscounted days somehow. But when she looked out the window, she saw Caleb Mercer climbing down from his wagon, and her stomach did something complicated that she didn't have time to examine. She opened the door before he could knock. "They're not ready," she said immediately. "You said 2 weeks. It's only been 6 days." Caleb looked at her like she'd said something confusing. "I'm not here for candles." "Oh." Clara became acutely aware that she was wearing her worst dress, the one with patches on the patches, and that her hair was falling out of its pins. "Then why—" "Your roof is leaking." Clara blinked. "What?" "Your roof. I noticed it last time. There's a section over the west corner that's going to collapse if we get much more snow." He gestured toward his wagon, which she now saw was loaded with lumber and tar paper. "Figured I'd fix it before that happens." "I didn't ask you to fix my roof." "I know. I can't pay you to fix my roof. I'm not asking you to." Caleb was already unloading lumber, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd made a decision and saw no point in discussing it further. Clara stood in her doorway, torn between gratitude and irritation. The irritation won. "Mr. Mercer, I don't need charity." "Good. I'm not offering charity. I'm fixing a roof that's dangerous." He set down a bundle of shingles and looked at her directly. "You want to stand there arguing about it? Or you want to hold the ladder while I work? Because either way, I'm fixing the roof." There was no pity in his voice, no condescension, just a statement of fact delivered in a tone that suggested he'd had this exact argument before and knew how it ended. Clara grabbed her coat. "I'll hold the ladder." They worked for 3 hours in the cold. Caleb moved across the roof like he'd been born doing it, pulling off damaged shingles and replacing them with quick, practiced motions. Clara held the ladder and passed up materials when he asked for them, and tried not to think about how strange this was. Caleb Mercer, one of the richest men in the territory, fixing the roof of a widow's cabin for no reason she could understand. "You do this often," she called up at one point. "Fix roofs? Help random people." Caleb paused in his work. "You're not random, and I'm not helping. I'm preventing a collapse that would have cost someone, probably you, a hell of a lot more than a few hours of work." "That sounds like helping. That sounds like common sense." He went back to hammering. "Besides, I owed Thomas." Clara's hands tightened on the ladder. "What do you mean you owed him?" "He worked my ranch that summer when my foreman quit without notice. Left me short-handed right before a cattle drive. Thomas showed up, worked harder than men twice his size, never complained." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was something underneath it Clara couldn't quite name. When he left for the mines, I told him if he ever needed anything to come find me. He never did, so I'm making good on that offer now. He's dead. I know, that's why I'm here. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just held the ladder and watched Caleb work. This man who apparently kept promises even to dead people. When he finished, he climbed down and surveyed his work with a critical eye. That'll hold through the winter. Spring, you'll want to replace the whole section, but this'll keep snow out for now. Thank you, Clara said, and meant it despite her earlier protests. Caleb started packing his tools. Those candles coming along? Yes. I should have them done by next week. No rush, like I said. 2 weeks is fine. He paused, one hand on the wagon. You eat today? The question caught her off guard. That's not your concern. It's a yes or no question, Mrs. Whitmore. Clara's pride warred with her honesty. Honesty won, barely. Not yet. Caleb reached into the wagon and pulled out a package wrapped in cloth. Leftover roast from yesterday. My cook made too much. He held it out. Clara didn't move. Mr. Mercer, it's going to spoil if someone doesn't eat it? You want to waste good food over pride? This isn't about pride. Sure it is. Everything's about pride when you've got nothing else. He said it without judgment, like he was stating a fact about the weather. Take the food, Mrs. Whitmore. It's just food. Clara took the package. It was heavy, warm, even through the cloth. Her mouth watered. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb nodded and climbed onto his wagon. Then he paused, looking at her cabin with that same unreadable expression from before. You know, my ranch house has 16 rooms, and I live in maybe 3 of them. Seems wasteful. I suppose it does. All that empty space just sitting there. Could use some light in those rooms. Make the place feel less... He stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Less what? Clara asked. Less like a tomb. He said it so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then he shook his head like he was clearing something away. Anyway, 2 weeks for those candles, earlier if you need the money before then. He left before Clara could respond. Inside, she unwrapped the roast and found not just meat, but bread, cheese, and half an apple pie. Enough food for 3 days if she was careful. She ate standing at her table, too hungry to bother with plates or manners, and tried not to cry because crying over kindness felt more pathetic than crying over cruelty. The next week passed in a blur of work. Clara made candles during the day and into the night, hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind wandered to places she usually kept locked. She thought about Caleb on her roof, the careful way he'd worked. She thought about his voice when he'd mentioned the tomb. She thought about the fact that he'd remembered Thomas, had thought enough of him to help his widow years later. She thought about all of this more than she should have. When the 2 weeks were up, Clara had 40 candles ready, more than Caleb had asked for, because she couldn't seem to stop making them. She packed them carefully and waited. He arrived exactly on time, mid-morning on a Tuesday that was cold enough to freeze breath. Got your candles ready? He called from the wagon. Clara brought them out, and Caleb examined each one with surprising care, holding them up to the light, checking the wicks. These are good, he said finally. Better than good. Thank you. How much? Clara named a price, higher than before, remembering what he'd said about underselling herself. Caleb counted out money without hesitation, then added extra. That's too much again, Clara protested. It's an advance for the next batch. I haven't agreed to a next batch. You will. He started loading candles into his wagon. Because I've got a proposition for you. Clara's defenses went up immediately. She'd heard men make propositions before. They never ended well. What kind of proposition? Caleb must have seen something in her face because his expression shifted, became more careful. A business proposition, nothing else. I need candles on a regular basis. Say, 40 every 2 weeks through the winter. You make them, I buy them. Steady income for you, steady supply for me. Why do you need so many candles? Told you, 16 rooms. Nobody lights 16 rooms. Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the candles. When he spoke, his voice was different, rougher, like the words cost him something. My wife used to light them. Every room, every night, said a house should feel lived in, not just occupied. He paused. She died 4 years ago. Daughter too. Fever. After that, I stopped bothering. But the house, it's dark all the time now. Feels wrong. Clara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. Caleb shook his head like he was shaking off the memory. Anyway, you interested in the arrangement or not? Every instinct Clara had screamed that this was too good to be true. Nobody offered steady work without wanting something in return. But Caleb's face was open, honest in a way that was hard to fake. I'm interested, she said carefully, but I deliver them here. I can't travel to your ranch every 2 weeks. I'll pick them up. Gives me a reason to come to town. You hate coming to town. How do you know that? Everyone knows that. You come maybe twice a year? Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Fair point, but I'll manage. They settled on terms. 40 candles every 2 weeks, delivered and paid on Tuesdays. The money was more than Clara had made in the previous 6 months combined. It was enough to pay rent, buy food, replace her worn-out clothes. It was enough to stop waking up every morning wondering if today would be the day she lost everything. One more thing, Caleb said as he climbed onto his wagon. Storm's coming in tonight. Big one according to the sky. You need anything before it hits? Clara glanced at her woodpile, which was smaller than it should be. I'm fine. Mrs. Whitmore. Caleb's voice was patient but firm. I can see your woodpile from here. You've got maybe 2 days' worth if you burn it careful. Storm like the one coming, you'll be inside for 3, maybe 4 days. I'll manage. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it true. He studied her for a long moment. I've got extra wood at the ranch, more than I need. I could bring some by. No. The word came out sharper than Clara intended. No, thank you. I appreciate everything you've done, but I can't. I won't keep taking from you. It's firewood, not a marriage proposal. Clara felt her face heat. I know what it is. I also know how it looks. How what looks? You. Here. Bringing me things. People talk, Mr. Mercer. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You don't... Clara stopped, trying to find words for something she'd never said out loud. You don't know what it's like being watched all the time, being judged. Every choice I make, someone's got an opinion about it. If I accept help from you, the whole town will have me painted as either desperate or scheming by Sunday. Caleb climbed down from the wagon. He moved slowly, deliberately, and stopped a respectful distance away. You care what Red Hollow thinks? I live in Red Hollow. I don't have a choice but to care. Everyone's got a choice. That's rich man talk, Clara said, surprising herself with her bluntness. You can afford not to care what people think? I can't. My reputation is all I have. Caleb was quiet, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he said, Your reputation. Right. The one where people mock you at the market, where they laugh when boys destroy your work, where they call you pathetic behind your back and to your face? His voice wasn't cruel, just factual. That reputation? Clara flinched because he was right, and they both knew it. Mrs. Whitmore, Caleb continued, softer now, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to make a point. You're worried about what people think, but they already think the worst. So maybe, and I'm just suggesting, maybe you should stop worrying about their opinions and start worrying about getting through the winter. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're making it complicated. He turned back toward his wagon. I'm bringing firewood by tomorrow. You can accept it or not, but I'm bringing it. Mr. Mercer, Caleb, if we're going to argue every time I see you, you might as well use my first name. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. We're not arguing. Could have fooled me. Caleb climbed onto the wagon again. Tomorrow, before the storm hits. He left before she could protest further. True to his word, Caleb arrived the next morning with a wagon full of firewood. Also true to Clara's word, she tried to refuse it. They stood in her yard and had what was probably their third argument in as many weeks. I don't need it, Clara insisted. Your woodpile says different. I'll manage. You know, you say that a lot. Because it's true. No, because you're stubborn. Caleb started unloading wood without waiting for permission. And before you tell me again that you can't accept this, it's not a gift. You're doing me a favor. How is taking your firewood doing you a favor? Because I've got too much and nowhere to store it. He said it so smoothly that Clara almost believed him. You're lying. Prove it. Clara opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. You're impossible. I've been called worse. Caleb kept unloading. You going to help or just stand there looking offended? Clara grabbed logs and started stacking them, muttering under her breath about stubborn ranchers who didn't know when to mind their own business. I heard that, Caleb said mildly. Good. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm becoming almost comfortable. Clara was acutely aware of Caleb's presence beside her, the way he moved, the way he breathed, the occasional grunt when he lifted something heavy. It had been a long time since she'd worked alongside someone like this. Thomas had always been at the mine during the day. She'd forgotten what it felt like to share space with another person in comfortable quiet. Can I ask you something? Clara said after a while. Depends on the question. Why are you doing this? Really doing this, I mean. Not the story about needing candles or having too much firewood, the real reason. Caleb set down the log he was holding and looked at her. His eyes were serious, thoughtful. You want the truth? Please. I don't know. He said it simply, like it surprised him too. When I saw you at that market, kneeling in the mud while people laughed, something about it made me angry. Not regular angry, the kind of angry that sits in your chest and won't leave. Why? Because I've been where you are. Different circumstances, maybe, but the same feeling. That moment when you realize nobody's coming to help, that you're completely alone and the world doesn't care. Caleb picked up another log, not looking at her now. After my wife and daughter died, people brought food for a week. Then they stopped. Stopped visiting, stopped asking how I was. Just stopped. Like grief has an expiration date and I'd missed mine. Claire's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand that I get it, what you're going through, and maybe I can't fix it, but I can make it slightly less terrible. That's all this is. That's not all this is, Clara said quietly. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that Clara couldn't name. It wasn't attraction exactly, though she'd have to be dead not to notice he was handsome in a rough, weathered way. It was something deeper than that. Recognition, maybe. Like looking across a distance and seeing someone else standing in the same darkness. Maybe not, Caleb admitted, but it's all I can explain right now. The storm hit that night like a fist through glass. Wind howled around Clara's cabin, rattling the windows and finding every crack in the walls. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see more than a few feet past her door. The temperature dropped so fast the water in her wash basin froze solid. But she had firewood, enough to keep the stove burning hot, to keep the worst of the cold at bay. She made candles by that warmth, listening to the storm rage outside, and thought about Caleb in his big, empty house with 16 rooms he didn't use. The storm lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, when the wind finally died and the snow stopped falling, Clara heard a wagon approaching. She knew before she looked outside that it was Caleb. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes. His face was drawn, and he moved like everything hurt. You all right? Clara asked, opening the door. Fine. Just checking you made it through the storm. I did. Thanks to the firewood you absolutely didn't need to get rid of. Caleb almost smiled. You're welcome. Can I come in? It's freezing out here. Clara hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. Caleb had been in her cabin before, briefly, but having him inside now felt different. More intimate somehow. He looked around the space. One room that served as kitchen, workroom, and bedroom all at once. His gaze lingered on her work table, covered with candles in various stages of completion, then moved to the corner where her bed sat, neatly made despite the early hour. It's small, Clara said, defensive. It's warm. That's what matters. Caleb moved to the stove, holding his hands toward the heat. Coffee? Yes. Let me make some. Clara busied herself with the coffee pot, hyper-aware of Caleb's presence in her tiny space. He seemed to take up more room than he should, not because he was particularly large, but because of some quality she couldn't name. Presence, maybe. The sense that wherever he stood became significant. You look tired, she said, measuring coffee grounds. Didn't sleep much during the storm. Why not? Caleb was quiet long enough that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "The wind." It sounded like... He stopped, jaw tightening. It reminded me of things I'd rather forget. Clara understood that too. There were sounds that could drag you back to moments you'd spent years trying to escape. For her, it was the whistle of the mine horn. For Caleb, apparently, it was wind. She poured coffee into two mismatched cups and handed him one. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Clara pulled back too quickly, sloshing coffee onto her hand. "Careful," Caleb said, reaching out instinctively. "I'm fine." Clara wiped her hand on her apron, flustered in a way that felt ridiculous. She was a grown woman, not a girl experiencing her first crush, except it had been so long since anyone had touched her with anything approaching gentleness that the brief contact had sent something electric through her entire body. They drank coffee in awkward silence. "I should go," Caleb said finally, setting down his cup. "Just wanted to make sure the cabin held up." "It did. The roof you fixed didn't leak at all." "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Whitmore. Clara, can I ask you something?" It was the first time he'd used her first name. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" The question hit harder than it should have. "Yes." "Yeah, me too." Caleb pulled his hat down, hiding his eyes. "See you in 2 weeks." After he left, Clara sat at her work table and stared at the door for a long time. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't move to reheat it. She just sat there, thinking about loneliness and kindness and the way Caleb's voice had sounded when he'd asked that question. Like he already knew the answer, like maybe he'd been asking for himself as much as for her. The next 2 weeks developed a rhythm. Caleb came by twice, both times with flimsy excuses about checking the roof or dropping off supplies he couldn't use. Both times they ended up talking longer than they should have, conversations that started awkward and became easier as they went on. Clara learned that Caleb hated winter, but loved the way snow looked on the mountains. That he'd taught himself to read as an adult and still struggled with complicated words. That his favorite food was his cook's apple pie, but he'd never tell her that because she'd get insufferable about it. Caleb learned that Clara had wanted to be a teacher before she'd married Thomas. That she missed Virginia sometimes, missed trees that weren't pine and air that didn't hurt to breathe in winter. That she sang while she made candles, old songs her grandmother had taught her, but only when she thought nobody was listening. They learned these things in fragments, small pieces offered carefully like gifts that might be refused. And something grew between them, unnamed and probably unwise, but real nonetheless. On the Tuesday when Caleb came for the next batch of candles, Clara had them ready and waiting. 40 perfect candles, her best work yet. Caleb examined them with that careful attention he always brought to her work. Then he said, "I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind where you say no if you want to." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "There's a problem at the ranch. My cook quit last week, family emergency back east. My foreman's wife has been helping, but she's got her hands full with her own household. And I've been trying to do the cooking myself, but..." He stopped, grimacing. "Let's just say what I make isn't fit for human consumption." "You want me to cook for you?" "No. I want you to come stay at the ranch for a while. Make your candles there, eat regular meals, have a warm place to work." He said it quickly, like he'd been rehearsing. "There's a whole wing of guest rooms. You'd have privacy, space, everything you need. And I'd pay you for the candles, same as always, plus extra for helping with meals." Clara stared at him. "You want me to move into your ranch house?" "Temporarily, just until I find a new cook." "Mr. Mercer, he..." "I know how it sounds," Caleb interrupted. "I know what people will say. But the truth is, I'm drowning out there alone, and you're freezing out here alone, and it seems stupid that we're both suffering when there's a simple solution." "A simple solution," Claire repeated. "You really think people will see it that way?" "I don't care what people see." "But I do." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "I care because I have to live in this town after you get tired of your charity project." Caleb's expression hardened. "Is that what you think this is? Charity? What else would it be?" "It's..." He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's two people who are lonely helping each other, that's all. And when people start talking about the widow living with the rich rancher, when they call me names, assume I'm..." Clara couldn't finish the sentence. "Let them talk," Caleb said fiercely. "Let them think whatever they want. You'll be warm and fed and safe, and that matters more than their opinions." "Easy for you to say." You keep saying that, and you keep being wrong. Caleb stepped closer, his voice intense. I lost my wife and daughter. You think this town was kind about it? You think they didn't whisper about how I must have done something to deserve it? How if I'd been a better husband, a better father, maybe they'd still be alive? Clara's breath caught. That's not... It's exactly what they said. For months. Every Sunday at church. Every time I came to town. Pity and judgment wrapped up together until I couldn't tell which was worse. Caleb's eyes were blazing now. So don't tell me I don't understand what it's like to be talked about. I understand perfectly. I also understand that their talking doesn't keep you warm at night. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Clara said, I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. Caleb's voice was gentler now. Offer stands whenever you're ready. He paid for the candles, loaded them into his wagon, and left without another word. Clara watched him go and wondered what the hell she was supposed to do with a man who offered her everything while asking for nothing, who saw through her defenses like they were made of glass, who looked at her like she mattered. She was still wondering 3 days later when the next storm hit and her stove died in the middle of the night, and she woke to a cabin so cold her breath came out in clouds, and her fingers wouldn't bend right. Clara tried to restart the fire, but something was wrong with the flue. Smoke backed up into the cabin, choking and black. She managed to get the door open, stumbling outside into knee-deep snow and wind that cut like knives. Her choices were simple: freeze to death in the cabin or freeze to death outside. She chose outside. Clara made it maybe 100 yards before her legs gave out. She knelt in the snow, coughing smoke from her lungs, and thought about how stupid it was to die like this, how Thomas would have fixed the stove, how her grandmother would have known better than to let it get this bad, how she'd been too proud to accept help when it was offered. The cold was creeping in now, making her drowsy. Clara knew that was dangerous, knew she needed to get up and move, but she was so tired. Maybe if she just rested for a minute. Clara! The voice seemed to come from very far away. Clara, stay awake! Hands on her shoulders, shaking her. Clara forced her eyes open and saw Caleb's face above hers, pale and frightened. What are you doing here? She mumbled. Shut up and hold on. Caleb lifted her like she weighed nothing, carrying her through the snow to his wagon. Clara wanted to protest, to say she could walk, but the words wouldn't come. Everything was so cold and so distant, and she was just so damn tired. She woke up warm. That was the first thing she registered. Warmth, real warmth, seeping into bones that had forgotten what it felt like. The second thing was softness. She was lying on something soft, under blankets that were thick and heavy and smelled like cedar and smoke. Clara opened her eyes and found herself in a bedroom that was bigger than her entire cabin. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace. The furniture was solid, well-made, nothing fancy but built to last. Through the window, she could see snow falling gently, peaceful now instead of violent. The door opened and Caleb came in carrying a tray. He stopped when he saw her awake. How do you feel? He asked. Warm. Clara's voice came out rough, her throat raw from smoke. How did you... I was coming to check on you. Storm like this, I figured your cabin might have trouble. Found you in the snow. He set the tray down on the bedside table. You're lucky I came when I did. I'm stupid, you mean? That too. But there was no judgment in his voice, only relief. Brought you soup. Think you can eat? Clara struggled to sit up, and Caleb helped her, adjusting pillows behind her back with surprising gentleness. She was wearing a nightgown she didn't recognize, clean, warm, far too large. Your clothes were wet, Caleb said, seeing her look. Mrs. Patterson, my foreman's wife, changed you. She's downstairs if you want to see her. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Of course he'd thought of that, of propriety, of making sure she felt safe. Thank you. Caleb handed her the soup. Their fingers brushed again, but this time Clara didn't pull away. She was too tired to maintain that distance, too grateful to be alive to worry about what touching him might mean. Your cabin's not safe, Caleb said as she ate. The stove's completely shot, and there's smoke damage throughout. You can't go back there. I don't have anywhere else to go. You do now. Caleb met her eyes. I meant what I said before. Stay here. Not as charity, not as anything except... He stopped, searching for words. Except two people helping each other survive the winter. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. saw the exhaustion in his face, the loneliness he tried to hide, the fear that he'd hidden when he'd found her in the snow. And she realized something she'd been avoiding for weeks. She trusted him. "Okay," she said quietly. Caleb's expression shifted, surprise and relief mixing together. "Okay? I'll stay. Until the spring thaw at least. Until I can figure out what to do about the cabin. You can stay longer if you want. There's no rush. Let's start with spring and see what happens." Caleb nodded, something that looked almost like a smile touching his mouth. "Fair enough." He stood to leave, but Clara stopped him. "Caleb?" He turned back. "Thank you for coming to find me, for—" She gestured at the room, the soup, everything. "For all of it." "You're welcome," he said simply. After he left, Clara finished her soup and lay back against the pillows, listening to the fire crackle and the wind outside. She'd made a choice tonight, one she couldn't take back. She'd agreed to stay in Caleb Mercer's house, to live under his roof, to let the town talk all they wanted. And for the first time in 8 months, Clara Whitmore didn't feel afraid. She felt something else entirely. Something that might, if she was very brave, be the beginning of hope. The rumors started before Clara had been at the ranch for a full week. She heard about them from Mrs. Patterson, who came to Clara's room one morning with fresh linens and a troubled expression that said she'd rather be anywhere else. "I thought you should know," Mrs. Patterson said, setting the linens on the bed with more force than necessary. "What they're saying in town." Clara's stomach dropped. She'd been expecting this, had known it was coming, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch. "What are they saying?" "That you're—" Mrs. Patterson stopped, her face flushing. "That you and Mr. Mercer are, well, you know." "I see." Clara kept her voice steady, even though her hands were shaking. "And what do you think?" Mrs. Patterson looked at her directly. "I think Mr. Mercer gave you a room in the guest wing, not his bedroom. I think you make candles in the conservatory all day and eat dinner with him in the dining room with my husband and me right there. I think anyone with eyes can see there's nothing improper happening." She paused. "But I also think people believe what they want to believe, and right now they want to believe the worst." "Thank you for telling me." "There's more." Mrs. Patterson twisted the edge of her apron. "Vivian Ashcroft's been the loudest about it. She's telling everyone who'll listen that you're, pardon my language, a scheming widow who trapped Mr. Mercer with pity and tears." Clara had met Vivian Ashcroft exactly once, at the Christmas market. The woman had looked at her like she was something unpleasant scraped off a boot. Why does she care what Mr. Mercer does? Because she's been expecting him to propose for 2 years now. Her father and Mr. Mercer do business together, and everyone assumed, well, that they'd make it official eventually. Mrs. Patterson smoothed the linens unnecessarily. "She's not taking kindly to you being here." After Mrs. Patterson left, Clara sat on the edge of her bed and tried to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to leave, to go back to her smoke-damaged cabin and figure something else out, to remove herself from Caleb's life before the gossip got worse and damaged his reputation along with hers. The problem was she didn't want to leave. The ranch was warm and safe and quiet in a way her cabin had never been. She had her own space, a proper work table in the conservatory where light poured in through tall windows. She made better candles here than she'd ever made before, had time to experiment with colors and scents without worrying about wasting materials she couldn't afford to replace. And then there was Caleb. They ate dinner together most nights. Awkward at first, but becoming easier. He asked about her work. She asked about the ranch. They talked about nothing important, and somehow it felt significant anyway, these small exchanges in the lamplight while winter raged outside. She'd catch him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't read, and sometimes she'd watch him back, noticing things she had no business noticing. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he was tired, the scar on his left hand from some long-ago accident, the rare times he almost smiled. Clara was developing feelings she absolutely could not afford to have. She found Caleb in the barn that afternoon, working on a saddle that needed repairs. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her face. "What happened?" he asked immediately. "Nothing happened. We need to talk." Caleb set down the leather and gave her his full attention. "I'm listening." Clara had rehearsed this on the walk over, had planned exactly what to say. But standing in front of him, watching the way afternoon light came through the barn slats and lit dust motes in the air, all her careful words disappeared. "People are talking," she said finally. "Let them talk." "It's not that simple. Vivian Ashcroft is telling everyone that we're—" Claire's face heated. "That I'm using you, that this whole thing is some kind of scheme." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Vivian Ashcroft can go to hell. She has influence in this town, her family. I don't care about her family." Caleb stood, moving closer. "Is that what you think? That you're using me?" "No, but it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what they think." "Why?" The question stopped Clara cold. "What do you mean, why?" "Because I have to live here. Because my reputation— Your reputation was already ruined before you ever stepped foot on this ranch," Caleb said bluntly. "Those people at the market? They already thought the worst of you. The only difference now is they're saying it louder." "That's not fair." "None of this is fair. But leaving here, going back to freezing in that cabin, letting them win, that's not fair either." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Clara, you're safer here. You're warmer, better fed. You're making good money from the candles. Why would you give that up because Vivian Ashcroft is jealous? This isn't about Vivian. Then what is it about?" Clara looked at him, at this man who'd saved her life and asked for nothing in return, who treated her like she mattered, who made her feel things she'd thought died with Thomas. And she realized she couldn't tell him the truth, that she was scared of how much she was starting to care, that every day she stayed made it harder to imagine leaving, that the thought of him with someone like Vivian made her chest ache in ways she had no right to feel. "I don't want to cause you problems," she said instead. "You're not causing me problems. Vivian's causing problems. The gossips in town are causing problems. You're just trying to survive the winter. It's more complicated than that now." "Why?" "Because I think about you constantly," Clara wanted to say. "Because your laughter stays in my mind long after I hear it. Because this empty ranch no longer feels empty when I'm here. Because it just is," she said. Caleb studied her face, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But I'm asking you to stay. Not for me. For you. Because you deserve a warm place and good food and space to work without worrying about whether your stove's going to die in the middle of the night. And when spring comes, when the snow melts and people expect me to go back to town, then we figure it out when spring comes." Caleb stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see the flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes. "Stay, please." Clara had never been good at denying people who said please like they meant it. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Something shifted in Caleb's face, relief maybe, or something deeper. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, I'm being selfish." "Good, be selfish. You've earned it." 3 days later, Clara went into town for the first time since moving to the ranch. She needed fabric for new dresses. Her old ones were falling apart, and she couldn't keep wearing the borrowed clothes Mrs. Patterson had given her. Caleb offered to go with her, but Clara refused. She needed to face Red Hollow on her own terms, needed to prove to herself she could walk through town with her head up despite what people were saying. The fabric shop was on the main street, wedged between the general store and a boarding house. Clara pushed open the door, and the bell chimed overhead. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Brennan, a middle-aged woman Clara had bought from before, looked up and her expression immediately cooled. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice flat, "what can I do for you?" "I need fabric, 3 yards of cotton, dark blue if you have it." Mrs. Brennan moved slowly, deliberately, taking her time pulling out bolts of fabric and laying them on the counter. 2 other women were in the shop, both of whom Clara recognized from church. They'd stopped their conversation when she'd entered and were now whispering to each other while shooting glances her direction. Clara ignored them and focused on the fabric. She found a serviceable blue cotton and a dark green wool that would be warm. "I'll take both," she said. Mrs. Brennan measured and cut without speaking, her movements sharp and disapproving. When she named the price, it was noticeably higher than what Clara had paid before. "That's not right," Clara said. "This cotton was 40 cents a yard last month. Prices went up." "By 20 cents? In 4 weeks?" Mrs. Brennan's eyes were cold. "Take it or leave it." Clara wanted to leave it, wanted to walk out and never give this woman another cent. But she needed the fabric, and they both knew it. She counted out the money, each coin feeling like a small surrender. I heard you're staying at the Mercer Ranch, Mrs. Brennan said as she wrapped the fabric in brown paper. Clara's spine stiffened. That's correct. Must be nice, living in luxury while the rest of us work for what we have. I work for what I have too. Do you? Mrs. Brennan tied the package with twine, pulling it tight. Or are you working for something else entirely? One of the other women snickered. Clara picked up her package, her face burning. My business with Mr. Mercer is exactly that. My business. Oh, I'm sure it's very much business, Mrs. Brennan said, and the other women laughed outright now. Clara left before she said something she'd regret. Outside, the winter air hit her face like a slap, but it was better than the suffocating judgment inside. She made it halfway down the street before Vivian Ashcroft stepped directly into her path. Vivian was beautiful in the way wealthy women often were, carefully maintained, expensively dressed, confident in her own importance. She looked at Clara like she was something that needed to be scraped off the bottom of her expensive boot. Mrs. Whitmore, Vivian said, her voice dripping false sweetness. How lovely to see you in town. I thought you'd be too busy at the Mercer Ranch to bother with us common folk. Miss Ashcroft. Clara tried to step around her, but Vivian moved to block her path. Tell me something, Vivian continued, loud enough that people passing by could hear. Does Caleb know you're only interested in his money, or does he actually believe you care about him? Clara's hands tightened on her package. You don't know anything about me or Mr. Mercer. I know plenty. I know you're a poor widow with nothing to your name who happened to catch the attention of the richest man in the territory. I know you're living in his house, eating his food, spending his money. What would you call that if not scheming? I'd call it surviving. You'd call it opportunity. Vivian stepped closer, her voice dropping to something more venomous. But here's what you need to understand, Mrs. Whitmore. Caleb is going to realize what you are eventually. He's going to see through your helpless widow act and understand that you're nothing but a charity case who got lucky. And when that happens, when he throws you out, you'll have nothing again. Except this time, you won't even have your pathetic reputation to fall back on. Clara wanted to slap her, wanted to scream that Caleb wasn't like that their arrangement was built on respect and something approaching friendship. But defending herself would only make things worse, would give Vivian more ammunition. Are you finished? Clara asked quietly. Not even close. Vivian's smile was sharp and cruel. You want to know what's really sad? You actually think he might choose you. A broken-down widow who makes candles in a falling-apart cabin? You think a man like Caleb Mercer would choose that over someone who can actually offer him something? Over me? If you're so confident he'll choose you, why are you bothering to threaten me? The question landed like Vivian hadn't expected it. Her smile faltered for just a second before hardening back into place. I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you. There's a difference. Vivian stepped aside finally. Enjoy your time at the ranch, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm sure it'll be over soon enough. Clara walked past her with her head held high, but inside she was shaking. She made it all the way to where she'd tied Caleb's horse. He'd insisted she take one before her legs gave out, and she had to lean against the hitching post to steady herself. The words kept echoing in her head. Charity case. Scheming widow. Broken down. You think he might choose you. The worst part was that some of it was true. She was poor. She was living in Caleb's house, and she absolutely had been starting to hope that maybe, somehow, he saw her as something more than a temporary charity project, which was stupid. Caleb Mercer could have anyone. Why would he choose a widow with nothing to offer but a talent for making candles? Clara rode back to the ranch slowly, dreading the moment when she'd have to face Caleb and pretend everything was fine. But when she arrived, the house was quiet. Mrs. Patterson said Caleb had ridden out to check the northern pastures and wouldn't be back until late. Clara retreated to her room and stayed there. She skipped dinner, telling Mrs. Patterson she had a headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her head did hurt, pounding in time with her racing thoughts. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock on her door. Clara? Caleb's voice. You all right? Clara considered not answering, but ignoring him felt childish. I'm fine, just tired. Can I come in? It's not. That wouldn't be appropriate. A pause. Then Caleb said, I'll stay in the hallway, but I need to talk to you. Clara opened the door. Caleb was leaning against the doorframe, still wearing his riding clothes. his face drawn with exhaustion and something else. Concern, maybe. "Mrs. Patterson said you didn't eat," he said. "I wasn't hungry. She also said you came back from town looking upset." "I'm fine." "Clara." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "What happened?" Clara wanted to lie, to brush it off, to pretend Vivian's words hadn't burrowed under her skin like splinters. But she was so tired of pretending. "Vivian Ashcroft cornered me, said some things." Clara kept her voice flat, factual. "She thinks I'm using you. She thinks you're going to realize it eventually and throw me out." Caleb's expression darkened. "What else did she say? Does it matter?" "Yes." Clara looked at him, at the genuine anger in his eyes, and something in her chest cracked. "She called me a charity case, said I'm nothing but a broken-down widow who got lucky, that you'd never choose someone like me over someone like her." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Caleb said, very quietly, "She's wrong." "Is she?" "Yes." Caleb pushed off from the doorframe, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Clara, I don't know what Vivian thinks is between us, but she's been wrong about it from the start. I'm not interested in her. I've never been interested in her. Her father keeps pushing the idea, and she's convinced herself it's inevitable, but it's not going to happen." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Clara struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal too much. "The point is she's right about one thing. I am a charity case. I don't have anything to offer you except what? Your work? Your company? The fact that you're the first person in 4 years who's made this house feel less like a tomb?" Caleb's voice rose slightly. "You think that's nothing?" Clara's breath caught. "Caleb, no, listen to me. You want to know what Vivian can offer me? Money, social standing, connections to her father's business interests. You know what she can't offer? An actual conversation, a meal where I don't feel like I'm performing for someone, a moment of peace where I'm not being judged or measured against some expectation." He paused, his eyes intense. "You think I don't know the difference between someone who wants me and someone who wants what I have?" "I don't want anything from you," Clara said, her voice small. "I know, that's the point." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Everyone in this territory wants something from me. Land, money, influence, connections. You're the only person who acts like I'm just a person, not a transaction, not an opportunity. Just Caleb." Clara didn't know what to say to that. She'd been so focused on her own insecurities, her own fears of being judged, that she hadn't considered what it might be like for him, to be seen as a prize instead of a person. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I didn't think about it that way." "Don't apologize, just—" Caleb looked at her, and his expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. "Don't let Vivian or anyone else make you think you don't belong here. You do. More than any of them know." "Why?" The question came out before Clara could stop it. "Why what? Why do I belong here?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because when you're here, the house doesn't feel empty anymore. Because I look forward to dinner instead of dreading it. Because you laugh at my terrible jokes and argue with me when I'm being stubborn, and—" He stopped, jaw working. "Because you make me feel less alone." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You make me feel less alone, too." The words hung between them, too honest and too revealing. Caleb's eyes darkened. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. "I should go. Let you rest." "Caleb?" He turned back. "Thank you. For defending me. For everything." Something flickered across his face. "You're welcome." After he left, Clara lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. Sleep was impossible. Her mind kept replaying the conversation, the look in Caleb's eyes, the roughness in his voice when he'd said she made him feel less alone. She was in trouble, real trouble, the kind that came from caring about someone you had no business caring about. The next few days were awkward. Clara and Caleb danced around each other, both of them too aware of what had been said, what had been almost acknowledged. They still ate dinner together, still talked, but there was a new tension underlying everything, a sense of something waiting to break. Mrs. Patterson noticed. "You two have a fight?" she asked Clara one morning while they were preparing vegetables for lunch. "No, why?" "Because you both look miserable and you're avoiding each other." Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look. "That's usually what happens after people say things they can't take back." Clara chopped carrots with more force than necessary. We're fine, if you say so. They worked in silence for a while. Then Mrs. Patterson said carefully, Can I give you some advice you didn't ask for? Can I stop you? No? Mrs. Patterson set down her knife and looked at Clara directly. Mr. Mercer is a good man. He's been alone too long, and it's made him harder than he should be. But when you're around, he's different, lighter somehow, like he remembers what it's like to be human instead of just surviving. Mrs. Patterson, Ihan, I'm not saying you owe him anything. I'm saying that whatever's growing between you two, and don't bother denying it, I've got eyes, it's real and rare. And if you let fear or pride or what people think destroy it before you even figure out what it is, you'll regret it. Clara stared at the carrots. What if it doesn't work? What if people are right? And I'm just what? Just someone who deserves kindness? Just someone who makes him happy? Mrs. Patterson's voice was fierce. Those people in town don't know you. They don't know him. They just like to talk. Don't let their talking steal something good. That night at dinner, Clara made a decision. She and Caleb were eating in the dining room as they had every night for weeks. The conversation was stilted, both of them trying too hard to act normal. Finally, Clara set down her fork and said, We need to stop this. Caleb looked up, alarm flashing across his face. Stop what? This. Dancing around each other, being weird. Clara took a breath. Something changed the other night. We both know it, and we can either acknowledge it or we can keep pretending everything's the same. But I'm tired of pretending. Caleb was very still. What do you want to acknowledge? That I care about you. Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. Not as someone who's helping me, not as a business arrangement, as you, Caleb. And it scares me because I don't know what that means or where it goes or if you... She stopped because Caleb had stood up and was moving around the table toward her. If I what? He asked quietly, stopping in front of her chair. Clara's mouth was dry. If you feel the same way. Caleb knelt down so they were at eye level. His eyes were intense, searching her face like he was looking for something specific. Clara, he said, his voice rough. I think about you constantly. I think about your laugh, the way you hum when you make candles, how you apologize before taking up space like you think existing is an imposition. I think about how brave you are, how strong, how you keep creating beauty even after everything this world has done to you. He paused. So yes, I feel the same way. I felt it for weeks. Clara couldn't breathe. Then why didn't you say anything? Because you're vulnerable. Because you're living in my house and I'm paying you for work and the power dynamic is all wrong. Because I didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated or... Caleb stopped, frustrated. Because I was afraid you'd think I was just another man trying to take advantage. I don't think that. Good. Because I'm not. Caleb reached up, his hand hovering near her face but not quite touching. But I need you to understand what you're getting into. People will talk more, not less. Vivian will make your life hell. The town will have opinions, and I can't protect you from all of it. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to be honest with me. Then here's honest. Caleb's eyes held hers. I want to see where this goes. I want to know what it's like to come home to someone who's genuinely happy I'm there. I want to fall asleep knowing you're in this house and wake up knowing you'll still be here. He paused. But only if that's what you want too. Clara felt tears building. What if I'm not enough? What if... You're enough, Caleb said fiercely. You've always been enough. It's the rest of the world that's lacking. Clara laughed, but it came out watery. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Yeah? Something that might have been a smile touched Caleb's mouth. I'm out of practice. Been a while since I tried to court anyone. Is that what this is? Courting? If you'll have me. Clara looked at him. This man who'd saved her life, who'd defended her, who'd given her space and safety, and now was offering something far more dangerous. A chance at something real. Yes, she whispered. I'll have you. Caleb's expression shifted into something Clara had never seen before. Relief and joy and something deeper, something that made her chest ache. He stood slowly, drawing her up with him. They stood facing each other in the dining room, the dinner forgotten, everything forgotten except this moment. Can I kiss you? Caleb asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb cupped her face with both hands, gentle despite his calluses, and kissed her like she was something precious he'd been afraid to break. Clara melted into it, her hands finding his shirt, holding on as the world tilted sideways. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to have to face them eventually," Clara said. "The town, Vivian, all of it. I know. They're going to be cruel. Let them try." Caleb pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I choose you, Clara, openly. Let the whole territory know it. I don't care what they think." Clara's breath hitched. "I choose you too." They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and for the first time since Thomas died, Clara felt like maybe she could have a future instead of just survival. Outside, snow fell softly against the windows. And inside, two lonely people discovered they didn't have to be lonely anymore. The weeks that followed were the best Clara had experienced in years, which made her distrust them completely. She and Caleb fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and terrifying. He'd find excuses to be in the conservatory while she worked, sitting in the corner reading or pretending to review ranch accounts while stealing glances at her. She'd make extra coffee in the mornings and bring it to his office, staying to talk about nothing important until Mrs. Patterson needed her help with something. They were careful. No kissing where the ranch hands might see, no holding hands at the dinner table. But there were touches. His hand on her back when she passed, her fingers brushing his when she handed him things, moments of contact that lasted just slightly too long to be accidental. Clara had forgotten what it felt like to want someone, to lie awake thinking about the way someone's voice dropped when they said your name, or how their eyes crinkled when they almost smiled. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure, because she knew it couldn't last. Nothing good ever did. The first crack appeared 3 days before Christmas. Clara was in town again, this time with Mrs. Patterson to shop for ingredients for the holiday meal. They'd just left the general store when they ran into Margaret Chen, the banker's wife, standing with two other women Clara didn't know well. "Mrs. Whitmore," Margaret said, her voice cool, "how nice to see you, and so close to Christmas, too. Will you be celebrating at the Mercer Ranch?" It was a trap. Clara could feel it, could see the anticipation in the women's eyes as they waited for her answer. "I will," Clara said carefully. "How lovely. And will it be just the two of you, or has Mr. Mercer invited others?" Mrs. Patterson stepped closer to Clara, a silent show of support. But Clara didn't need protecting. She'd dealt with worse than thinly veiled gossip. "I believe Mr. and Mrs. Patterson will be joining us," Clara said evenly, "as they do for most meals." "Of course." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that people are talking, you understand, about the arrangement. A widow living unchaperoned with a wealthy bachelor. Some might consider it improper." "Some might consider a lot of things improper," Clara replied. "I've learned to care less about some and more about people who actually matter." One of the other women gasped softly. Margaret's expression hardened. "Well," Margaret said, "I suppose we all show our true nature eventually. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore." They walked away, already whispering to each other. Mrs. Patterson let out a low whistle. "You've got spine," she said. "I'll give you that." "Or stupidity." Clara's hands were shaking. "I shouldn't have said that." "Why not? It was true." "Because now they'll say I'm rude on top of everything else." Mrs. Patterson looped her arm through Clara's. "Let them say it. Come on. We still need flour and sugar, and I'm not letting Margaret Chen ruin Christmas." But the encounter stayed with Clara, gnawing at her through the rest of the shopping trip and the ride back to the ranch. She kept hearing Margaret's voice, "People are talking," and wondering how much worse the gossip would get once she and Caleb made things official. If they made things official, they hadn't actually discussed what they were doing beyond acknowledging they cared about each other. Was Caleb planning to court her properly? Did he want to marry her eventually? Or was this just, what? A winter romance that would fade when spring came? Clara hated that she didn't know. Hated that asking felt like pushing too hard, like she'd be revealed as exactly what Vivian said she was, a desperate widow grasping at any chance for security. That night at dinner, Caleb noticed something was wrong. "You're quiet," he said, setting down his fork. "More than usual." "I'm fine." "Clara." Caleb's voice was patient but insistent. "What happened?" Clara pushed food around her plate. Mrs. Patterson had excused herself early, claiming a headache, which meant they were alone in the dining room. It should have felt intimate. Instead, it felt heavy. I ran into Margaret Chen in town, Clara said finally. She had some thoughts about our arrangement. Caleb's expression darkened. What kind of thoughts? The kind where she implies I'm ruining your reputation by living here unchaperoned. The kind where she suggests people are talking. Clara looked up at him. Are they? Talking more than before, I mean. Probably. Caleb didn't sugarcoat it. Does it matter? Yes. No, I don't know. Clara set down her fork, appetite gone. Caleb, what are we doing? What do you mean? I mean, what is this? Us. Are we courting? Are we just... She struggled for words. I don't know what to tell people when they ask. I don't know what we are. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered darkness. I'm not good at this, he said finally, talking about feelings, making plans. Sarah, my wife, she was the one who knew how to do all that. I just followed her lead. Clara's chest tightened. I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm just asking what you want. I want you here. Caleb turned to face her. I want to wake up knowing you're in this house. I want to come home to someone who actually cares if I made it back safe. I want... He stopped, jaw working. I want a future that's not just me alone in this empty house waiting to die. That's what you don't want, Clara said quietly. What do you want? Caleb crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. His palms were rough, warm, steady. I want you, he said simply. However I can have you, for however long you'll stay. And if I want more than that? What more do you want? Clara looked at their joined hands, at the way her small fingers looked wrapped in his larger ones. I want to know this is real, that I'm not just convenient, a way for you to feel less lonely until someone better comes along. Someone better? Caleb's voice rose slightly. Clara, there isn't anyone better. There's you. That's it. You say that now, I'll say it tomorrow too. And next week. And next year if you give me the chance. Caleb squeezed her hands. I know my track record isn't great. I know I've been alone so long people probably think I'm incapable of caring about anyone. But I care about you. More than I've cared about anything in 4 years. Clara felt tears building. I'm scared. Of what? Of this being temporary. Of you waking up one day and realizing I'm not worth the gossip or the trouble. She paused. Of being happy and having it taken away again. Caleb pulled her down from the chair, gathering her into his arms. Clara buried her face in his shirt, breathing in the smell of leather and soap, and something that was just him. I'm scared too, he admitted quietly. Every time you leave the ranch, I'm afraid you won't come back. That you'll realize you can do better than a bitter rancher with a dead family and a house full of ghosts. Clara pulled back enough to see his face. That's not how I see you. Then stop assuming I see you as convenient. Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her face. You want to know what we are? We're two broken people trying to figure out if we can fix each other, or at least be broken together in a way that hurts less. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't the declaration Clara had been hoping for. But it was honest, and somehow that mattered more. Okay, she whispered. Okay. We'll figure it out. Together. Caleb kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth. Clara kissed him back and tried not to think about all the ways this could still fall apart. The annual Christmas Eve celebration in Red Hollow was the social event of the winter. Every family attended, dressed in their finest, bringing candles to light the square and contributions for the communal feast. There was music, dancing, and a competition for the best holiday candles, a tradition that went back decades. Clara had never participated before. As a miner's wife, she hadn't had the money or the social standing to bother. But this year was different. You should enter, Caleb said over breakfast 4 days before the celebration. Your candles are better than anything they've seen. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? B, because people already think I'm trying to climb above my station. Entering a competition I've never entered before, showing up with you, it'll just give them more to talk about. Let them talk. Clara set down her coffee cup harder than necessary. You keep saying that like it's easy, like words don't matter. Words only matter if you give them power. That's rich man talk again. Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're right, it is. But here's poor man talk. I grew up with nothing. My father drank away every cent we had. My mother worked herself to death trying to keep us fed. I know what it's like to be looked down on, Clara. I know what it's like to have people assume you're trash because of where you come from. Clara hadn't known that. Caleb never talked about his past, his childhood. She stayed quiet, letting him continue. I made something of myself anyway, he went on. Built this ranch from nothing, worked until my hands bled, proved every person who said I'd fail wrong. And you know what I learned? People will always find something to criticize, always. So you might as well do what you want and let them choke on their opinions. It's different for women, Clara said quietly. You know it is. If you're a man who builds something from nothing, you're admirable. If you're a woman who tries the same thing, you're grasping, ambitious in the wrong way. Then be ambitious in the wrong way. Caleb's eyes were intense. Enter the competition. Show them what you can do. Not because you need their approval, but because your work deserves to be seen. Clara wanted to argue more, to list all the reasons it was a bad idea. But there was a part of her, small and stubborn and tired of hiding, that wanted to do exactly what he suggested. 6 candles, she said finally. That's the requirement. 6 matching candles. So make 6 candles. And if I win, then you win. And if you don't, you still showed up, which is more than most people do. Clara spent the next 3 days making candles unlike anything she'd created before. She used her best beeswax, colored it with berry stains until they glowed deep red, embedded sprigs of evergreen that she'd carefully dried. Each candle took hours, every detail precise and deliberate. When she finished, she had 6 candles that looked like winter forest caught in wax, deep green and crimson, elegant without being gaudy, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache with pride. Mrs. Patterson came to look at them and whistled low. Those are going to cause problems. Good problems or bad problems? Both. Mrs. Patterson picked one up carefully, examining it in the light. These are better than anything Vivian Ashcroft has ever made, and she's won 3 years running. Clara's stomach dropped. Vivian enters the candle competition? Every year. Has a whole setup. Fancy molds, expensive dyes, imported wicks. She treats it like a coronation. Mrs. Patterson set the candle down gently. You're about to make yourself an enemy. I'm already an enemy. True, but this will make it official. On Christmas Eve, the square was transformed. Lanterns hung from every storefront. Evergreen boughs decorated every post, and tables lined the perimeter for the candle competition entries. Snow fell lightly, dusting everything in white that sparkled in the lamplight. Clara arrived with Caleb, her 6 candles carefully boxed. She wore the dress she'd made from the fabric Mrs. Brennan had overcharged her for, dark blue with green trim, simple but well made. Her hair was pinned up, her hands steady despite her nerves. The moment they entered the square, conversation stopped. Heads turned. Clara felt every eye tracking their movement as Caleb guided her toward the competition tables with a hand on the small of her back. Ignore them, he murmured. Hard to ignore 100 people staring. They're not staring at you. They're staring at us. Caleb's voice held grim satisfaction. Might as well give them something to look at. They reached the tables where other entries were already displayed. Most were standard holiday candles, red and green, some with gold leaf, others with ribbons. Nice enough, but unremarkable. Then there was Vivian's display. She'd claimed the center table, her candles arranged like a shrine. They were elaborate, tall white tapers with intricate gold designs, clearly expensive, clearly made to impress. A small crowd had gathered around them, murmuring appreciation. Vivian stood nearby in a crimson dress that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. When she saw Clara and Caleb approaching, her expression shifted from smug satisfaction to barely concealed fury. Mrs. Whitmore, Vivian said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. How surprising to see you here. I wasn't aware you planned to enter the competition. Last-minute decision, Clara said, keeping her voice neutral. How brave of you. Vivian's smile was sharp. Though I'm not sure amateur work really belongs alongside more, established entries. Caleb's hand tightened on Clara's back, but Clara spoke before he could. I suppose we'll let the judges decide what belongs. She unpacked her candles and arranged them on the assigned table. Around her, she heard the whispers start. Did you see those? Where did she learn that? They're actually quite good. Vivian's expression turned glacial. She walked over to examine Clara's entry, her movements deliberate and predatory. Interesting choice, Vivian said, loud enough for nearby people to hear. Berry stains and dried plants, very rustic, almost primitive. Thank you, Clara said, refusing to take the bait. It wasn't a compliment. Vivian picked up one of Clara's candles without asking permission, turning it in the light. Though I suppose when you're used to making charity candles for ranch houses, this is the best you can manage. The crowd around them had grown. People were watching the exchange with the hungry attention of spectators at a dogfight. Clara felt her face heating but kept her voice level. Please put that down. The oil from your hands will damage the finish. Vivian's smile was poisonous. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot how delicate amateur work can be. She set the candle down with just slightly too much force. Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore, does Mr. Mercer help you with your craft? Or does he just provide the materials while you pretend to be talented? That's enough. Caleb's voice cut through the square like a whip. Vivian turned to him, her expression shifting to something softer, more calculated. Caleb, I didn't see you there. How lovely that you've come to support Mrs. Whitmore's little hobby. It's not a hobby, it's her profession, and her work is better than anything on these tables. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. You didn't make proclamations like that before the judging. It was considered poor form, almost offensive. Vivian's mask slipped, revealing genuine anger beneath. How would you know? You're a rancher, not a craftsman. Though I suppose you've been spending so much time watching her work, you've convinced yourself you're an expert. I know quality when I see it, Caleb said evenly. In work and in people. That's how I know Clara's candles will win tonight, and it's how I know you're threatened by her. Vivian's face flushed crimson. Threatened? By a charity case widow who… Careful. Caleb's voice dropped to something dangerous. Choose your next words very carefully, Vivian. The square had gone completely silent now. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Everyone was watching the confrontation unfold like it was theater. Vivian looked between Caleb and Clara, her face twisted with fury and something that looked almost like pain. Then she laughed, high and brittle. I see, she said. So it's true then. The rumors. You've actually chosen her. She said it like Clara wasn't standing right there. A broken-down widow with nothing to her name over everything I could offer you. Yes, Caleb said simply. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Clara's breath caught. He'd said it. In front of everyone, he'd claimed her publicly. No room for misinterpretation. Vivian's composure shattered. You're making a mistake. She's using you. Can't you see that? She's a nobody who got lucky. And when she's bled you dry of money and reputation, she'll what? Caleb interrupted. Love me? Support me? Make me feel like coming home actually means something? He paused. You're right, Vivian. That sounds terrible. However will I survive? Someone in the crowd snickered. Then someone else. Soon there was scattered laughter, and Vivian's face went from crimson to white. You'll regret this, she hissed. Both of you. Probably, Caleb agreed. But I'd rather regret choosing Clara than regret choosing you. Vivian turned and walked away, her expensive dress swirling behind her. The crowd parted to let her through, then immediately erupted into frenzied whispers. Clara stood frozen, her heart hammering. She'd expected Caleb to defend her, but this public declaration in front of the entire town, this was something else entirely. Did you just… Clara started. Yes. Caleb looked at her, his expression fierce and certain. I meant every word. Before Clara could respond, the mayor stepped forward to announce the start of judging. 3 town elders moved through the tables, examining each entry carefully. They spent a long time at Vivian's display. She'd fled, but her candles remained, and an equally long time at Clara's. The crowd pressed close, straining to hear the judge's murmured comments. Clara couldn't breathe. She stood with Caleb's hand steady on her back and tried to remember that winning didn't matter, that she'd already won just by being here. But she wanted to win, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised her. The judges conferred quietly. Then the mayor stepped forward and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a decision. This year's winner of the Christmas candle competition is—" He paused for effect, the bastard. "Mrs. Clara Whitmore." The square erupted into noise, applause, gasps, angry mutters, shocked exclamations. Clara stood there, stunned, unable to process what she'd just heard. She'd won. She'd actually won. "Clara," Caleb's voice was warm with pride, "go accept your prize." Clara walked to the mayor on legs that felt disconnected from her body. He handed her a ribbon and a small purse. The prize money, she realized, $20, more than she'd made in a good month before the ranch. "Congratulations," the mayor said, though his expression was complicated. "Fine work." "Thank you," Clara managed. She turned to face the crowd, holding the ribbon. Some people were applauding genuinely. She saw Mrs. Patterson grinning, saw a few of the younger women nodding approval. But others looked angry, offended that the widow they'd mocked had dared to win something meant for their betters. And then she saw Vivian at the edge of the square, her face a mask of pure hatred. Clara knew in that moment that this wasn't over, that winning tonight had come at a price she'd be paying for a long time. But when she looked at Caleb, saw the pride and affection in his eyes, she decided the price might be worth it. Later, after the feast, after the dancing, after most people had drifted home, Caleb found Clara standing alone near her candle display. The 6 candles were lit now, casting warm light across the snow. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." Clara looked up at him. "You're the one who told me to enter. You're the one who made something beautiful." Caleb pulled her close, not caring who might see. "I'm proud of you." Clara leaned into him, letting herself feel the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Vivian's going to make my life hell now." "Let her try." "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." Caleb tilted her chin up, looking at her seriously. "Clara, I meant what I said earlier, about choosing you. That wasn't just for show." "I know. Do you?" His eyes searched her face. "Because I need you to understand. I'm all in. Whatever this is, wherever it goes, I'm choosing you over everything else. Over business relationships with Vivian's father, over social standing, over what people think I should do." Clara's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because you make me feel alive," Caleb said simply. "Because when I'm with you, the world feels less empty. Because I'd rather face 1,000 Vivian Ashcrofts with you beside me than have an easy life without you." Clara kissed him there in the square, snow falling around them, her candles burning bright beside them. Let the whole town see. Let them talk all they wanted. She'd chosen him too. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Clara's breath stopped. "What?" "Marry me. Not eventually, not someday. Marry me." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "I know it's fast. I know people will say you're after my money and I'm being foolish, but I don't care. I want you in my life permanently. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build something new with you, something that's ours." Clara stared at him, her heart racing. This was everything she'd been afraid to hope for, everything she'd convinced herself couldn't happen. "I'm not easy to live with," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm stubborn and scared, and I don't trust good things because they always get taken away." "I know. I'll probably drive you crazy. I'm counting on it." Caleb smiled, really smiled, and Clara's chest ached at the beauty of it. "Say yes, Clara. Take a chance on us." Clara looked at the candles still burning beside them, at the light they cast against the darkness. She thought about Thomas, about her grandmother, about every person she'd lost, and every dream that had died. She thought about fear and safety, and the terrible risk of loving someone when you'd already learned how much losing them could hurt. Then she looked at Caleb, at this man who'd defended her and chosen her and was now offering her everything. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb pulled her into his arms and lifted her off the ground, spinning her in the falling snow. Clara laughed, actually laughed, free and joyful and completely unguarded. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and heat and a future neither of them could predict but both of them wanted. The 6 candles burned on through the night, their flames dancing against the winter darkness, like 2 lonely souls finally finding home in each other. And in that moment, Clara Whitmore stopped being afraid of happiness. She decided to reach for it instead. News of the engagement spread through Red Hollow faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the time Clara and Caleb returned to the ranch that night, half the town already knew. By morning, the other half had heard. And by noon the next day, opinions were flying like bullets in a gunfight. Clara woke to find Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen, her face tight with worry. "There's talk," Mrs. Patterson said without preamble. "Bad talk. Vivian's father is threatening to pull his business from the ranch. Says Caleb's made a fool of himself over a woman of questionable character." Clara's stomach turned. "How much business does Mr. Ashcroft represent?" "Enough to hurt. He buys a third of our cattle every year." Mrs. Patterson poured coffee with shaking hands. "My husband says Caleb doesn't care, but that's a lot of money to lose over—" She stopped. "Over me," Clara finished quietly. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did. And you're right to worry." Clara wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, needing the warmth. "I should talk to Caleb. Maybe if we wait, let things settle." "Don't you dare!" Mrs. Patterson's voice was fierce. "Don't you dare let those people make you small again. Caleb chose you. He knew what it would cost, and he chose you anyway. But if he loses the ranch because of me—" "He won't. Ashcroft's not the only buyer in the territory." Mrs. Patterson squeezed Clara's shoulder. "Besides, you're worth more than any business deal. Caleb knows that, even if you don't yet." Clara wanted to believe her, but doubt had sharp teeth, and it was biting hard. She found Caleb in his office, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. He looked up when she entered, and his expression immediately softened. "Morning," he said. "Sleep well?" "Not really." Clara closed the door behind her. "Mrs. Patterson told me about Ashcroft." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Of course she did. Is it true? Is he pulling his business?" "Threatening to. Whether he actually does it remains to be seen." Caleb set down his pen. "Why? You having second thoughts?" "No, but you should be." Clara moved closer to his desk. "Caleb, that's a third of your income. You can't just—" "I can do whatever I want with my ranch and my life." His voice was calm but absolute. "Ashcroft's been trying to control me for years through business deals and his daughter. I'm done being controlled. This isn't about control. It's about survival. No, it's about pride. His pride." Caleb stood and came around the desk. "Clara, look at me." She did, reluctantly. "I have enough money to survive 10 years of Ashcroft's tantrums," Caleb said. "I have other buyers, other contracts. Will it hurt? Yes. Will it destroy me? No." He took her hands. "But losing you would destroy me. So if the choice is between Ashcroft's business and you, I choose you. Every single time." Clara felt tears building. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've built." "You're not. You're the reason I remember why I built it in the first place." Caleb pulled her close. "Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. I'm a grown man. I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Clara pulled back enough to see his face. "Because from where I'm standing, you're throwing away important relationships for a widow you've known for 2 months. I'm choosing happiness over business. There's a difference." Caleb's eyes were intense. "And it's not 2 months. It's every moment since I saw you kneeling in that square covered in mud, still trying to salvage your work while people laughed. It's every conversation we've had, every dinner, every time you've made this house feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Time doesn't matter when you know. Know what? That you found the person you're supposed to build a life with." Clara kissed him because words felt inadequate. Caleb kissed her back, and for a few minutes the rest of the world disappeared. When they finally broke apart, Clara said, "When should we get married?" "Tomorrow, if you want." Clara laughed despite herself. "That's too fast. People will really talk then." "Let them. But fine. Pick a date that makes you comfortable." Clara thought about it. 2 weeks? New Year's Day. Start the year together. Caleb smiled, and Clara realized she was seeing it more often now, that rare expression that transformed his entire face. New Year's Day it is. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Clara had nothing for her wedding. No dress, no flowers, no guests beyond the Pattersons, and a handful of ranch hands. She'd imagined getting married again someday, but never like this. Never with the whole town talking, never with half the territory convinced she was a gold digger and the other half convinced Caleb had lost his mind. Mrs. Patterson tried to help with preparations, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the speed of everything. "You're sure about this?" she asked Clara one afternoon, while they were attempting to alter one of Clara's dresses into something wedding appropriate. "I'm not judging, but 2 weeks is fast." "I'm sure." Clara examined the stitching they'd just done. It was crooked, but it would hold. "I've spent too much of my life being careful, being afraid. For once, I want to just do something because it feels right." "And this feels right?" "Terrifying, but right." Clara looked up. "Does that make sense?" Mrs. Patterson smiled, something sad and knowing in her expression. "More than you know. I married my husband 3 weeks after we met. Everyone said we were crazy. 22 years later, they're still saying it, and I'm still glad I didn't listen." The dress was finished 2 days before the wedding. It wasn't fancy. Dark green wool with cream lace at the collar and cuffs. Practical and warm. But it was clean and well made, and when Clara looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't see a charity case or a widow grasping at security. She saw a woman about to marry a man she loved. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She loved Caleb, not because he'd saved her, not because he provided security, but because of who he was. His rough edges and rare smiles, his fierce protectiveness and surprising gentleness, the way he listened when she talked and remembered small details she'd mentioned weeks ago. She loved him, and somehow that made everything more terrifying, because love meant vulnerability. Love meant giving someone the power to destroy you. And Clara had already been destroyed once. She was still standing in front of the mirror, spiraling into panic, when someone knocked on her door. "Clara? You in there?" Caleb's voice. Clara opened the door to find him looking worried. "Mrs. Patterson said you've been up here for 2 hours," he said. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Just thinking." Caleb studied her face. "You're panicking." "I'm not." Clara stopped. There was no point lying to him. "Maybe a little. Want to talk about it?" Clara stepped back, letting him into the room. Caleb closed the door and leaned against it, giving her space. "I'm scared," Clara admitted, "of this being real, of letting myself believe I get to have this." "Why?" "Because everything I've ever loved has been taken away. My grandmother, Thomas, the life I thought I'd have, all of it, gone. And you're," she gestured helplessly, "you're the best thing that's happened to me in years, which means losing you would be the worst thing. And I don't know if I can survive that again." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed off from the door and crossed to her, taking her hands. "I can't promise I won't die," he said bluntly. "I can't promise we won't face hardships or that everything will be perfect. But I can promise that I'm choosing this, choosing you. Every day for the rest of my life, I'm choosing you." "What if that's not enough?" "Then it's not. But I'd rather have whatever time we get than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Caleb squeezed her hands. "Clara, I'm scared too. I lost my wife and daughter. I know exactly how much it hurts to love someone and lose them. But I also know that hiding from love doesn't make you safe. It just makes you alone." Clara felt something loosen in her chest. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being afraid." Caleb pulled her close. "Marry me, Clara. Take the risk. Let's be terrified together." Clara laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "Good thing I'm not proposing again. You already said yes." "I could change my mind." "You won't." Caleb said it with complete confidence, and Clara realized he was right. She wouldn't change her mind because despite the fear, despite the risk, she wanted this, wanted him, wanted a future that wasn't just survival. 2 more days, she said. 2 more days, Caleb agreed. Then you're stuck with me. I can think of worse fates. The morning of New Year's Day dawned clear and cold. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the ranch in pristine white. Clara woke early, too nervous to sleep, and found Mrs. Patterson already in the kitchen making breakfast. "Big day," Mrs. Patterson said, setting down a plate of eggs and toast. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Clara tried to eat but could barely taste the food. Her stomach was a tangle of nerves and anticipation. The wedding was planned for noon in the ranch house parlor. Just immediate household, the Pattersons. 3 ranch hands who'd been with Caleb for years, And the two of them. No guests from town, no ceremony at the church. Just a simple exchange of vows witnessed by people who actually cared about them. Clara had worried that it would feel wrong, getting married without family or friends. But as she dressed in her green wool dress and pinned up her hair, she realized this was exactly right. Intimate and real, without the performance of a big wedding. She was fastening the last button when Mrs. Patterson knocked and entered. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes bright with tears. "I look nervous." "That too, but mostly beautiful." Mrs. Patterson handed her a small bouquet of evergreen and winter berries. "I made this morning, thought you should have something to hold." Clara took the bouquet, her throat tight. "Thank you, for everything, for believing in me when most people didn't." "You made it easy." Mrs. Patterson hugged her quickly. "Now come on, can't keep the groom waiting." The parlor had been transformed. Someone, probably Mrs. Patterson, had brought in candles, dozens of them, filling the room with warm light. Evergreen boughs decorated the mantel, and a small table held what looked like Clara's candles from the Christmas competition. And there was Caleb, standing by the fireplace in a dark suit that made him look both dangerous and devastatingly handsome. When he saw Clara, his expression shifted into something that made her chest ache. "You're beautiful," he said quietly as she approached. "You already saw this dress." "I'm not talking about the dress." Mr. Patterson stepped forward, a worn Bible in his hands. He wasn't a preacher, but he'd officiated weddings before, and Clara trusted him. "We're gathered here today," Mr. Patterson began, his voice formal but warm, "to witness the union of Caleb Mercer and Clara Whitmore. Two people who found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build something together." Clara barely heard the rest of the opening words. She was too focused on Caleb's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "Caleb," Mr. Patterson said, "do you take Clara to be your wife? To stand beside her in good times and bad? To support her and cherish her for as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Caleb's voice was steady, absolute. "Clara, do you take Caleb to be your husband? To stand beside him in good times and bad? To support him and cherish him for as long as you both shall live?" Clara took a breath. This was it. The moment where she chose to stop being afraid, to reach for happiness even knowing it could be taken away. "I do," she said. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Caleb had somehow procured in the last 2 weeks. When he slid the ring onto Clara's finger, his hand was shaking slightly, and she realized he was just as nervous as she was. "By the power vested in me by this territory," Mr. Patterson said, smiling now, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb pulled Clara close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they had an audience. Clara kissed him back and felt something she'd thought was dead flicker back to life. Hope. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Patterson was crying openly, and even the ranch hands looked suspiciously misty-eyed. "Congratulations," Mr. Patterson said, shaking Caleb's hand. "Take care of her." "I will," Caleb promised. Mrs. Patterson hugged Clara so tight she could barely breathe. "Be happy," she whispered. "You deserve it." They had a small celebration. Food Mrs. Patterson had prepared, coffee and pie, laughter and conversation that felt easy despite the magnitude of what had just happened. The ranch hands made toasts that were awkward and sincere, and Mrs. Patterson told embarrassing stories about Caleb that made Clara laugh until her sides hurt. It was simple and imperfect, and exactly what Clara hadn't known she wanted. As afternoon faded into evening, the ranch hands and Pattersons excused themselves, giving the newlyweds privacy. Clara and Caleb stood in the parlor surrounded by candles, the weight of what they'd just done settling over them. "We're married," Clara said, like saying it out loud would make it real. "We are." Caleb pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Having regrets yet?" "Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough?" They stood there in the candlelight, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. Outside, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. "I love you," Clara said suddenly. "I don't think I've actually said that yet." Caleb went very still. Then he pulled back to look at her, his eyes intense. "Say it again. I love you. Not because you saved me or because of the ranch or any practical reason. I love you." The way you listen and the way you smile and the way you make me feel like I matter." "You do matter," Caleb said roughly. "Clara, I love you too. Have for weeks now. I was just afraid if I said it too soon, you'd think I was trying to trap you or sure." Clara kissed him to shut him up. Caleb kissed her back, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent. His hands found the buttons of her dress, and Clara's fingers worked at his shirt, and somehow they made it to the bedroom without breaking apart. That night, Clara learned what it meant to be loved by someone who actually saw her. Not the widow, not the charity case, not the woman who needed saving. Just Clara, flawed and scared and stubborn and enough. When she finally fell asleep in Caleb's arms, she felt safe for the first time in years. The backlash started the next morning. A letter arrived from Ashcroft formally terminating all business contracts with the Mercer Ranch. Another letter came from the bank, subtly suggesting that Caleb reconsider some investments given his recent choices. 3 ranchers who'd been friendly before suddenly had other suppliers for the goods they'd purchased from Caleb for years. Clara watched the letters pile up and felt guilt gnawing at her. "This is my fault," she said, staring at the stack of correspondence. "It's their fault," Caleb corrected. "They're the ones choosing business over basic decency." "But if we hadn't gotten married so fast, then they would have found some other excuse. Clara, these people were looking for a reason to pull away. They don't like that I won't play their political games or marry who they think I should marry." Caleb tossed the letters into the fire, watching them burn. "I knew this was coming. I don't care." "You should care. This affects your livelihood." "My livelihood will be fine. I've got other contracts, other buyers. It'll be tight for a few months, but we'll manage." Caleb turned to her. "What I won't manage is living my life according to other people's expectations. I did that for too long after Sarah died. I'm done." Clara wanted to argue more, but she was learning that Caleb's stubbornness matched her own. The real blow came 3 days later when Vivian showed up at the ranch. Clara was in the conservatory making candles when Mrs. Patterson rushed in, her face pale. "Miss Ashcroft is here," she said. "She's demanding to see you." Clara's stomach dropped. "Where's Caleb?" "Out checking the northern pastures. Won't be back for hours." Mrs. Patterson looked worried. "You don't have to see her. I can send her away." Clara thought about it. Running would be easier, safer. But she was tired of running, tired of letting Vivian and people like her dictate how she lived. "No," Clara said, setting down her work. "I'll see her." Vivian was waiting in the parlor, looking around the room like she was cataloging everything to report back later. She turned when Clara entered, her expression cold. "Mrs. Mercer," Vivian said, making the title sound like an insult. "Or should I still call you Mrs. Whitmore? I'm not sure which name you're using to con people these days." "What do you want, Vivian?" "Straight to the point. How refreshing." Vivian moved closer, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. "I want you to understand something. You think you've won. You think because Caleb married you that this is over, but it's not. It's just beginning." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. My father has already cut ties with the ranch. Others will follow. By the time we're done, Caleb will be ruined. And when he is, when he's lost everything because of you, he'll resent you for it." Vivian's smile was vicious. "That's when you'll see what you really are. Not his wife, not his partner, just a mistake he made in a moment of weakness." Clara felt anger rising, hot and fierce. "You're wrong about him, about us." "Am I?" "Because from where I'm standing, you're a poor widow who manipulated a lonely man into marriage. You saw an opportunity and took it. Don't pretend this is anything more than survival." "You're right," Clara said quietly. "I was surviving, barely. I was cold and hungry and alone, and Caleb helped me. But that's not why I married him." "Then why did you?" "Because he makes me laugh. Because he listens when I talk. Because when I'm with him, I don't feel like I'm constantly apologizing for existing." Clara stepped closer. "Because I love him, and he loves me, and that terrifies you." Vivian's composure cracked. "You don't know anything about what terrifies me. I know you expected Caleb to choose you. I know you're angry because he didn't. But that's not my fault, Vivian. That's yours. You treated him like a business deal instead of a person. You assumed your money and your father's influence were enough. And when they weren't, you decided to destroy him rather than accept that he chose someone else. I'm not trying to destroy him. I'm trying to save him from you." "No," you're trying to punish him for not wanting you. Claire's voice was steady now, certain. And you're trying to punish me for being wanted. But here's the thing, you can take his business contracts. You can turn the town against us. You can make our lives as difficult as you want. But you can't take what we have. You can't make him stop loving me or make me regret choosing him. Vivian stared at her, something almost like pain flashing across her face. Then her mask slammed back into place. We'll see how you feel in 6 months when you're broke and friendless, she said coldly. I've been broke and friendless before, Clara replied. I survived it. I'll survive whatever you throw at me too. Vivian turned and walked toward the door, but before she left, she looked back. I could have made him happy, she said, and for the first time she sounded almost human, almost vulnerable. Maybe, Clara said, but he didn't want your version of happiness. He wanted mine, and that's the part you can't forgive. After Vivian left, Clara sat in the parlor and shook. The confrontation had drained her, left her feeling raw and exposed. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Pride. She'd faced Vivian alone and hadn't backed down. Hadn't apologized for existing or for being chosen. For the first time in her life, Clara had stood her ground completely. When Caleb came home and Mrs. Patterson told him what had happened, he looked furious. She came here? He demanded. To our home? It's fine, Clara said. I handled it. You shouldn't have to handle it. This is... Caleb paced the room like a caged animal. I'm going to have a conversation with Ashcroft. This ends now. Caleb, no. That's what they want. They want you angry and reactive. Clara stood and caught his arm. Let them do their worst. We'll survive it. You're sure? I'm sure. Clara pulled him close. We have each other. Everything else is just noise. Caleb held her tight, and Clara felt his tension slowly ease. The next few months tested that conviction. Business was tight. Several more ranchers pulled contracts, and money became scarce. Caleb had to let go of 2 ranch hands, and the ones who remained took pay cuts. The house felt colder because they were burning less firewood, and meals became simpler as they stretched resources. In town, Clara faced constant whispers and cold shoulders. Shop owners charged her more. Women crossed the street to avoid her, and children repeated cruel things their parents said about the widow who'd trapped Caleb Mercer. There were nights Clara lay awake wondering if this was sustainable. If love was really enough when you were struggling to keep the ranch afloat and the whole town hated you. But there were also mornings when she woke to Caleb's smile, evenings when they worked side by side, him on ranch accounts while she made candles, comfortable in shared silence. Moments when he'd look at her across the dinner table and she'd see everything she needed reflected in his eyes. And slowly, imperceptibly, things started to change. A rancher from 2 territories over heard about the quality of Caleb's cattle and placed an order bigger than anything Ashcroft had ever done. A merchant passing through bought Clara's entire stock of candles and commissioned more for his store in Denver. Mrs. Patterson's sister spread word about Clara's work, and orders started coming in from places that had never heard of Red Hollow or its gossip. They were still struggling, still fighting uphill, but they were fighting together, and that made all the difference. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought hope with it. Clara was in the conservatory one afternoon in April when she heard a commotion outside. She looked up to see 3 wagons pulling into the ranch yard, all loaded with lumber and supplies. Caleb appeared in the doorway, grinning like he'd won something. What is this? Clara asked. Come see. Outside, a crew of men were unloading materials. Clara recognized Mr. Patterson and some of the ranch hands, but there were others too, men she'd never seen before. I made a deal, Caleb explained. Sold some land I wasn't using to a developer from Denver. Got enough to pay off some debts and hire a crew. A crew for what? Caleb pulled her toward the edge of the property where her old cabin still stood, damaged and abandoned. We're tearing that down and building you a proper workshop, big enough for all your candles with good light and heat and storage. Your own space. Clara stared at the cabin, then at Caleb. You're building me a workshop? You're good at what you do, Clara, better than good. Those orders from Denver, that's just the start. You could build a real business if you had the right space. Caleb's eyes were bright with excitement. So I'm giving you the space. Clara felt tears building. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me support your dreams the way you've supported mine. Clara kissed him there in front of everyone, not caring who saw. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for taking a chance on a bitter rancher with a dead family and a house full of ghosts." "You're not bitter anymore." "No," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. "I'm not." The workshop took 6 weeks to build. Clara watched it take shape from foundation to walls to roof, each day bringing it closer to completion. When it was finally finished, she stood in the center of the large open space and cried. It was perfect. Large windows for natural light, a proper ventilation system for wax fumes, storage shelves built to her specifications, a work table twice the size of what she'd had before. Everything she needed and more. "You like it?" Caleb asked from the doorway. "I love it." Clara turned to him. "How did you know exactly what I needed?" "I paid attention, watched how you work, what frustrated you, what you wished you had." Caleb smiled. "Besides, Mrs. Patterson helped with the details." Clara crossed the room and hugged him fiercely. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. You deserve this and more." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Now go make something beautiful. I want to see what you create when you're not worried about survival." So Clara did. She made candles unlike anything she'd created before. Elaborate designs and subtle colors, pieces that were as much art as function. She experimented with scents and textures, played with shapes and sizes, pushed her craft in directions she'd never dared before. And people noticed. Orders increased. The merchant in Denver started requesting specific designs. A hotel in San Francisco commissioned candles for their grand opening. Clara's work spread by word of mouth, each satisfied customer leading to 3 more. By summer, she was making more money than she'd dreamed possible. More importantly, she was creating things she was proud of, things that felt like hers in a way nothing had since her grandmother's death. One evening in late June, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch was thriving again, new contracts replacing the old ones, respect earned through hard work rather than politics. "You know what I realized today?" Clara said, leaning against Caleb's shoulder. "What's that?" "I'm happy, really, genuinely happy, and I'm not afraid of it anymore." Caleb's arm tightened around her. "Good, because you deserve to be happy." "So do you." "I am, have been since the day you agreed to stay." They sat in comfortable silence, watching light paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. In the distance, Clara could see her workshop, solid and real, proof that she'd built something that couldn't be taken away. "Think the town will ever forgive us?" she asked. "Some of them already have, the ones worth knowing." Caleb paused. "The others don't matter." "Vivian?" "Married someone from back east, left Red Hollow 2 months ago. Her father's still cold, but he's running out of allies." Caleb shrugged. "People get tired of holding grudges when they realize the world moves on without them." Clara thought about that, about how much had changed in 6 months, how different her life looked now compared to that awful day at the Christmas market. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me over all those business relationships?" Caleb turned to look at her directly. "Not for a single second. You want to know why?" "Why?" "Because those relationships were built on fear and obligation. This, us, is built on choice. Every morning I wake up and choose you. Every challenge we face, I choose you, and I'll keep choosing you for the rest of my life." Clara kissed him as the last light faded from the sky. When they finally pulled apart, stars were beginning to appear overhead. "I choose you too," she said, "even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "That's all we need," Caleb said. "Everything else, we'll figure out together." And they did. Years later, Clara would look back on that winter and marvel at how much had changed. How the woman who'd knelt in the mud at the Christmas market, broken and humiliated, had become someone who built a successful business and a life she was proud of. But the real miracle wasn't the success or the money or even the workshop. The real miracle was learning that she deserved to be happy. That wanting more than survival wasn't selfish. That love, real love, wasn't about being saved or saving someone else. It was about 2 people choosing each other every day, even when it was difficult, even when the world said they shouldn't. Clara had spent so long believing she was nothing, nobody, worthless. Caleb had shown her differently, not through grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but through steady presence and unwavering choice. Through seeing her when everyone else looked away. And in return, Clara had given him back his life, had reminded him that he was more than his grief, more than his losses, more than the walls he'd built around himself. Together, they'd learned that happiness wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you chose every day, in small moments and big decisions. They chose each other in the morning, coffee shared in comfortable silence. In the evening, spent working side by side. In the fights they had and the apologies they made. In the way they rebuilt a life from broken pieces and refused to let anyone tell them it wasn't valid. The town of Red Hollow eventually stopped talking. Some people never forgave them. Vivian's father went to his grave still bitter about the match. But others came around, slowly realizing that the scandal they'd been so invested in was actually just two lonely people finding each other. And in the end, that was all it had ever been. Clara's candles became famous throughout the territory. Her workshop expanded twice. She trained apprentices, shared her grandmother's techniques, built something that would outlast her. But her proudest moment wasn't any business success. It was the day, 3 years after their wedding, when she realized she'd stopped flinching when people looked at her, stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped measuring her worth by other people's opinions. She'd become the woman she was always meant to be, strong and soft, vulnerable and fierce, capable of great love and great creation. And Caleb, he became the man Sarah would have wanted him to be, not frozen in grief, but living fully, honoring his past while building a future, finding joy in small moments and big dreams. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb found Clara in her workshop late at night, working on a commission. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with an expression she'd come to know well. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just remembering that day in the square, when I saw you picking up broken candles while people laughed." "Why are you thinking about that?" "Because I almost didn't go over. Almost convinced myself it wasn't my business." Caleb crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "And if I hadn't, I would have missed this. All of it." Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I'm glad you went over." "Me too." They stood there in the workshop, surrounded by candles and tools and years of accumulated dreams, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Not the absence of struggle. Life was still hard sometimes, still full of challenges and setbacks. But the knowledge that whatever came, they'd face it together. That she wasn't alone anymore. That she'd found home not in a place, but in a person who chose her every single day. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. The candles Clara had made for that fateful Christmas competition still burned in their bedroom, carefully preserved and relit on special occasions. 6 candles that represented the moment everything changed. The moment she'd stopped hiding and started living. The moment she'd learned that sometimes love finds the people the world least expects. And when it does, it burns brighter than any fire in the wilderness.